Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the cartoonist behind Farmhand at Image Comics and the artist and co-creator of Chew. It's Rob Guillory. Thanks for coming on, Rob.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
So let's start with the basics. It's we're recording this on July 1st. We're halfway through the extreme ultra marathon that is 2020. How are you doing?
I'm doing as well as I probably could be at this point. My three kids they're all under age 9, and they've been home for like 4 months at this point.
Yeah,
and I've run out of things to do with them, and it's really becoming a problem.
You know, one of the funny things that I mean, obviously, there's like very limited hilarity to a pandemic. But at the same time, I was really amazed on like social media how quickly people with their kids went from like doing ordinary things to making these crazy Rube Goldberg devices that took up their entire houses. I was just like, that, I mean, you got there fast. What do you do after you're out of Rube Goldberg devices at that point?
Nothing. You just cry. At this point, the first couple months were okay. I mean, as okay as you can be when you're like, fearing for your life. But yeah, I mean, I was in the middle of taking a hiatus anyway, right when this hit.
Right.
I didn't schedule any cons this year at all. And I just finished issue 15 of Farmhand. So I was entering a hiatus. I had just taken a big commission list and I needed to slow down. My wife was in the same boat because she runs her own business also. And then when this hits, the first month was like, oh, this is interesting. We get to sleep however long we really want to. And, we go to bed when we want to. We can just like watch movies and like play with the kids. And it was really nice for the first like month or two. But at some point, my son, my oldest, my 9-year-old would just get up and look at me and say, hey, what are we doing today? And I would say, I don't really know. It's like, what do you want to do today? It's gotten weird.
Yeah, I had like the reverse. In the beginning, I was trying very hard to maintain a sense of normalcy. So I would still dress up really nicely for work, and I would like go through the whole routine. I'd get up at the right time, go to sleep at the right time, and slowly but surely, I've been going to sleep later and getting up later. And like when I'm on a call, I'll be wearing like a nice button-up shirt, and then underneath I have like shorts on. And it's just like I've slowly fallen down. I am definitely like a week from doing Rube Goldberg devices with my cats. I don't have kids. I guess that's one major difference between us. But you brought up the hiatus. That is one thing I wanted to bring up because as many ways as there can be like a fortuitous thing to a pandemic, like being on hiatus right at the beginning probably helped, but You're at the halfway point. You're at 15 issues through Farmhand on a planned 30-issue run. So why did you want to do a larger than normal hiatus at this point?
I was just really, really kind of burnt out. I think, I worked on Chew for 8 years as the artist and as the primary colorist, but I wasn't the writer. I wasn't managing the day-to-day kind of businessy aspects of it. Doing Farmhand has been a completely different experience. Doing like running this business,
right,
is really what it is. Has been, it really can be a drain. I mean, it's been super cool to step into those roles, and I've learned a lot. But I mean, just the last couple years of doing it, it's. I feel like I've grown as a storyteller and as a businessman, but at the same time, it was just time to take a break. I think especially this past arc, issues 11 through 15 were just some really, really heavy issues. And, as everyone knows who's read it, it's a very personal story to me. So where it ended with 15, I was just so completely drained that I just needed to step away from it. And I needed to kind of recharge my batteries. And also, we're developing it for television as well. So that was a whole other place that needed my attention. I just needed to recharge my batteries.
Yeah. I mean, looking at it, it's interesting how creator-owned titles can kind of become like mini empires on their own. And I'm not trying to make it seem like you're doing like a Walking Dead style thing, but at the same time, it's like you look at Farmhand and you have the comic, which you're writing and drawing. You have you have merch in the back of the book. You have all kinds of things like that developing. You have the AMC, show that you were writing scripts for and everything. You have all of that. Plus you have to like edit yourself. Plus with image books, you have to put the whole package together yourself. And then you also have like original art sales and this and that. And it's just like, when you think about it, it's like, maybe I don't mean this in a punny way, but to a layman, they might not see a huge difference between this and Chew, but it is like complete. I mean, I completely ignore the fact that you have to do things like this to promote the book, to try to keep growing that audience, to try to connect people with it. That is, I mean, it's like a full-time job on top of a full-time job on top of your original job on Chew.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I underestimated it also, because like I said, John was so good about taking care of all of those aspects of it, to where like, literally for 8 years, I just kind of, got up and I had the page in front of me to draw, and that was pretty much it. Now, I'm editing, I'm writing and editing and re-editing, and I'm making lettering guides, working with my letterer, or, I'm shooting emails to my designer for the book, or, I'm dealing with image on something, or I'm doing a podcast, or I'm like having a notes call with AMC, or like there's a lot of moving pieces there. And I feel like most of my time, 75% of my time, feels like it's handling the business aspects of it. And, there's a 25% where I get to like put my phone on do not disturb, put my headphones on, and just plow through the work.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It's interesting because I remember back during Chew, I always raved about your scheduling ability, but even then, like you were like, I don't know if you were completely at 100% max capacity, but you had like your situation figured out, and that was just drawing the book. And it's like, you can't, unless you have like a Hermione Granger style time turner or some ability to time travel or something like that, there's no way to, you can't create more time. Like you just have to find a way to make it work.
Yeah. And that's been tricky. I mean, that's been the difficult part about the lockdown with the pandemic is, thank God I had already decided to take a hiatus, because I don't know how the hell I'd be working and trying to get stuff out in this circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's having the kids around has cut my productivity, I wouldn't say in half, but it's definitely slowed things down substantially.
Did you have to become teacher, Rob?
Oh God. Yeah, no. Well, I mean, okay, so my oldest, he's 9, he's in the 3rd grade. So like, he's good with the Zoom classes. Like
Sure.
he is a tech guy. So like, he was all about it. He's super bright. Like he would basically do stuff, and then I would have to just take a picture of, I'd scan it and send it to his teacher or whatever. But my daughter's 5. She just turned 6, and she is, I mean, we tried a Zoom call with her teacher, and her teacher was not tech savvy, unfortunately. So she didn't know how to mute all the other kids. It's like 30 other children on this one Zoom call.
Anarchy.
And it's complete chaos. So my daughter she's not focusing on anything. So the Zoom call stuff did not work with her at all. So I would have to kind of like do the flashcards with her and like read with her, which is great. But, again, I never planned to do homeschool.
No.
This was not in the agenda. So yeah, we did some of that in the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, so I want to talk a little bit about your creative process, just because I think this is also like an interesting difference. Well, not really a difference, because you just weren't writing before, but I was reading an interview you did with the Comics Journal where you said, this was like around issue 5. You said, if I'm writing a bunch of scripts at a time over the course of a few months. That's how I wrote the first arc of Farmhand. I created a space where all I really did for 2 to 3 months was live in this world, and it wasn't until I finished the last script that I began drawing it. Is that how you're still working now that you're 3 arcs in? Like now that you're like, maybe, I don't know where you're at in the hiatus, if you're thinking about the 4th one, if you're writing the 4th one at this point, but is that how you're still approaching the story?
For the most part, I mean, there's been some, the first arc was the easiest to write that way.
Yeah.
I just knew what it was. It all fell into place. The second arc, was fine for, I think, issues 6, 7, and 8 were easy to write. I hit a snag because I kind of got stuck on issue 9, but I just plowed through it. I wrote the entire, from issue 6 through 10. And then this weird thing happened where, I was drawing issue 9, and I was at the halfway point of the issue, and I got to that place that I in the art where I basically had gotten stuck when I was writing it in the script, and I realized I hated everything from that page forward, and I hated all of issue 10. So I decided I'm going to rewrite this.
Right.
So right in the middle of the freaking issue, I decided to scrap the second half, and I completely rewrote the second half, and I completely rewrote issue 10. But issue 10, I wrote this. This is like a 28-page issue. I wrote it in a day.
Wow.
Just that quickly. So there's always kind of like some moving parts here. Whatever feels right in the moment, I kind of go with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of, when I'm trying to get those scripts out during that 1 to 2 months that I'm just, stockpiling scripts, I kind of just bulldog through it. And, for the most part, I'll know there will be some moments that I'm not in love with that I'll have to like rethink later, maybe.
Yeah.
But I just leave it there and say, screw it. I'll come back to it later. I'll check back in a month or two and see if I still have an issue with it. So like with issue 11, which is kind of this weird issue where, Jedediah ends up going to see a traiteur who's like kind of like a fortune teller, sort of a spiritual healer. And when he goes there, she basically, there's a sequence where it's kind of a flashback. You see like the history of Freetown, and there's a lot of like, that's when the first time you really see like there's this intense history of basically racial violence in Freetown. I hadn't really played it up to that point, but that was the moment you saw, oh wait, there's this really heavy undercurrent, this thing buried under Freetown that I've only hinted at until now, but here it is. And it scared the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Because I knew it would make the book into something else, and I didn't want it to be a book. I didn't want it to be a book that was all about race. I wanted it to be a book that anyone could relate to. But I was afraid of what it would become the second I pulled the curtain off and revealed, no, this has been about this the entire time. So I actually, when I came to actually draw it, I rewrote that 3-page sequence, I feel like 10 times. I redrew it a couple times. I just went back and forth on it so many different times. So that's just to say, I'll do whatever I feel works in the moment, and I'll have to re-edit and re-edit and re-edit until I settle on somewhere that feels right to me.
So to a certain degree, it's like you have your writer Rob, and writer Rob takes his stab at doing the whole arc. It's like, let's say 2 to 3 month process. And then you hand it off to artist Rob, and artist Rob, who's, obviously dealing with some of the same thoughts that writer Rob had because you're the same person. But once you get into that, then it maybe crystallizes some of those same problems you had, and you have to kind of revisit it and rethink it. So it's like you have a long-term thought, but you also have to deal with it in the short term, and it kind of shifts once you get to the short term because you're more mired in it. Maybe I don't know. That's interesting. I do think it's interesting to think of Farmhand, especially with the way that you approach it from a process standpoint, as almost having 2 distinct roles, despite the fact that you're both people doing the roles.
Right. Yeah. It's funny because I had a talk with Jonathan Hickman right when I was kind of making the jump from Farmhand as a comic to, a TV show. And we were just kind of going back and forth about, wearing both hats. And we were just laughing at how tempting it is, once you start actually writing, I can write a page in 30 minutes, but that same page drawing it is going to take me, 8 hours. So whenever I got my writing hat on, I'll just, write, crowd scene, done, done, horses, done.
Crowd of horses.
Exactly. Crowd of horses, riding horses. And, 3 months later when I'm drawing it, I maybe haven't read the script in a while, and I pick it back up and it's fresh to me. And it kind of does feel sometimes like someone else wrote it, and I'll pick it up and say, what the hell is this? Crowd of horses? Crap. I don't want to draw this. So yeah, it is this bizarre separation that occurs, but I allow myself to edit myself. If I see, when I put on the artist hat and I see my script and I get to the page and I realize, well, this is never going to work. What the hell was I thinking? I'll completely edit it right there on the page. And usually, after I've written it, after I've drawn it, and after my letterer, Cody Chamberlain, after he letters it, I take that back. Before he letters it, I actually do a final pass on the script and put the script side by side with what I've drawn. And I'll edit it one last time, and then he'll letter it. So there's like at least half a dozen passes before it's finished.
Man, that's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
So, I was before you even started doing like Farmhand for real, like we were talking about it, and I remember it hilariously, like you had told me, I think pretty much everything that was going to happen in the story arc by arc in like a document that you had. Thankfully, I am like apparently horrible at memory, and I've developed complete amnesia as to what happens. So every time I read an issue, I'm like, wow, this is crazy. I can't believe this is happening, despite the fact I saw that. But I know that you had this whole thing planned out, and it wasn't just in a general sense. You had the whole thing planned out. Has it largely followed that plan, or have the shifts that are happening kind of on a micro scale also happened more on a macro scale as well?
Well, I mean, much like Chew, again, in terms of writing and plotting a big thing like this, I learned a lot from John Layman. I mean, he didn't have every issue of the 60 issue series mapped out, but there were milestones. We always knew, here's issue 1, here's issue 5, here's issue 15, here's 30, and here's 45 and 60. And that's basically how I've mapped out Farmhand. I knew issue 1, I knew issue 5, I knew issue 15. Like the issue 15, the halfway point has been in my head from like the very beginning. So I always was writing toward that moment and kind of bringing things together that way. And moving forward, that is also how I'm plotting it. But I'm finding now, again, it's that writer thing. When I was writing the pitch and mapping out what I wanted every arc to be, it was the same thing. It's like, well, arc 3 will be about this, or arc 3 will be about that. It'll be one sentence blurb that kind of describes what it is. But now that I'm getting down to it and actually like mapping things out, it's a completely different animal. Because it's still about the one sentence blurb, but now it's starting to flesh out issue by issue, and it's looking a lot different than I imagined it, which is it's a good thing. But it's very interesting to watch how it's naturally evolved on its own beyond my initial plan. It's been interesting.
Well, I mean, it makes sense though, because when did you start this? What, like 2016? Yeah, 2016. Yeah. I mean, like it's been an interesting 4 years. Let's just say that. And I imagine that some of the ways you think about story and some of the ways you think about the world have shifted since then. So it's like when you look at your own story, it only makes sense that it would be shifts in terms of your perspective there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, specifically with my view of the world. I mean, like the last 4 years have been kind of insane. My perspective on a whole lot of things have shifted. I think what's interesting is, in a lot of ways, there are things in the story that were that are actually only becoming relevant now. Like I was thinking, when the pandemic started, I just finished an issue really about a pandemic. The Jedediah seed and the spread of the seed.
Yeah.
Everywhere, everyone's exposed to it, but they don't know it yet. And, it manifests in different people in different ways. And sometimes some people are asymptomatic and other people have these crazy mutations. Like, I didn't, it was strange when we started looking at COVID and it was kind of similar, that basically it had been around for a while and we didn't even know it was here.
Right.
Like I actually was in New Orleans in November of last year for a convention. And about 2 weeks after, actually exactly 2 weeks after I got home, I got sick. And I got sick, my kids got sick, and for the next like month and a half, we had this ongoing, what I thought was the flu. But my son actually got tested, and he actually tested negative for the flu, even though he had all the symptoms. And we didn't know what it was. We just thought it was a really weird thing. And then we started talking to other people, and I would do calls with people, and everyone was sick. Like everyone had this weird like respiratory virus. This is back in like January.
Yeah.
And then when the COVID came out, I started reflecting like, like I wonder how long this thing's been here.
Yeah.
And then, the more news you read, you realize, oh wait, it seems like no, it's been here since like possibly November.
Yeah.
Like oddly enough, so it's been interesting watching. Really, that's how I've treated Farmhand from the beginning. Was it was always the Jedediah seed was always out there. It was always leaking into the ecosystem even before issue 1.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just showing itself now.
I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, it's really interesting too, because there's like a lot of weird other accidental parallels where like, I mean, I don't want to spoil issue 15, but there's like a whole lot of people who have been affected by this who are, they're perhaps, let's say, controlled, but let's say they're a little bit more enthusiastic about getting it than they possibly should be. I kind of feel like that's reflected in the world. And also it's like, there's like a weird overlap because like the Jedediah seed is like, it's a business venture in of itself. And so when you combine like the overlap of economic ideas versus health and safety ideas, I mean, it's weird. I guess I hadn't thought of that, and my mind is just kind of racing about that. But talking about the plan though, you said that like you had an idea of like what 15 would be before you even got started. How close was that? Was it pretty spot on for what you originally imagined, or did that even shift?
It was actually right on the money.
Wow.
Because what was interesting was, again, I kind of mapped, usually when I'm mapping out an arc, I'll go issue by issue, scene by scene, and just kind of like, I'll sit with a big yellow notepad and with a pen and a paper and just basically go scene by scene what comes in my head, and I'll kind of edit it from there. But it plays out like a movie. And I really loved issue 15 because it all, like you start seeing it in issue 13 or 14, where like you start seeing the pieces come together. And I always knew I wanted it to come together at the church because it had to come together at the church. I mean, it was always, Farmhand's always been faith versus science in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Or, how do those things go together? So it only made sense that, it would end up there because so much had happened there with the death of Ezekiel's mom, and the specifically with the character Tree, who is, essentially like the, what is the character? He's kind of like your, I'm trying to think of a character who's like him. He's basically the guy who's warning everyone, this is all a horrible idea. And no one's listening to him. He's that guy.
The only analogy I thought of was Rorschach when he wasn't wearing his mask in Watchmen, which is a terrible analogy.
That's not bad. I was thinking more like Brody and Jaws.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Brody's like trying to warn the mayor, like, do not let people swim in the freaking. Don't let them go in the ocean. It's a bad idea.
Just basically anybody who's not a moron in Jaws.
Yes. So Treat's like the one guy who's like, how is this a good idea? Like, you're literally injecting plant DNA into people.
Right.
Like, how is this going to end well? And, the entire series up to this point has been Jedediah, who's, basically coming at it from the economic and scientific, way of thinking, basically looking at Tree and saying, like, you're an idiot. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to do my own thing. And, when the shit hits the fan in issue 15, where does Jedediah go? Like, he goes to Tree. He goes to the church. I mean, why did he go there of all places? Well, because it was a safe place. So yeah, that was always my picture from the very beginning. And there's more to come in the future couple arcs around that location.
Well, and Tree has always felt like a very crucial character just because of his like fulcrum relation. Or like Zeke is kind of like where everything kind of spins off of, but his relationship with Zeke, or Tree's relationship with Zeke, is completely different than his relationship with his dad. I don't know if this is deliberate or if it's just how it worked out, but I do think it's funny that there's this like evil Tree in like visions and stuff like that, and then there's the good Tree. It's like good Tree versus bad Tree. I do want to say one other thing. So I've thought about this a lot. This is a quick analogy. I broke my arm when I was 4, or not analogy, just a story, but I broke my arm when I was 4, bouncing on the bed on my parents' bed to the Simon and Simon theme song. I don't know if you remember Simon and Simon, but apparently I loved it. And I bounced off of the bed and landed on my arm and broke my arm. And the doctor set the bone wrong, or actually just didn't set the bone at all. And so my right arm is permanently dislocated because like there was like the bone was never placed into my elbow. And so I just have like literally one of my bones is just floating in my arm. It's like crazy. Anyways, whenever I go to doctors, the x-ray techs always gather and they're like, will you come let us speak about you at an event? And I'm like, I'd prefer not to. This seems weird. But anyways, and I've told my wife before, I was like, if I lost the ability to feel with my right arm, but I would get like a cool new bionic right arm that would work, I would totally go with it. I could totally see the appeal of like, of the Jedediah seed as a person who has like a wonky like body part. It's like you see the value. It's like I think to a certain degree, it's like the reason why nobody sees Treeside is because everyone sees the upside everywhere else, and it's enough for them to ignore the downside.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, people tend to look at the immediacy. They look at like, what can I get right now?
Right.
Where Tree's the only guy asking, well, yeah, but how's this going to play out like 10 years from now?
Yeah, this has clear darkness upside. Lots of darkness coming.
Right. I mean, it's just not, I'm not anti like science or anti medicine, but I am skeptical enough to often wonder, who are these people that are like, beta testing this drug? Like
there is here's another parallel: hydroxychloroquine. Maybe don't use that, or don't drink Clorox or whatever.
Right.
Anyways, yeah, sometimes bad advice. But, speaking of characters, I am interested. I just had Jeff Smith on the podcast, and one of the things we talked about when we were talking about Bone was kind of how things expanded or contracted as you moved along. And, like, he brought up the fact that he did this story. Have you ever read Bone?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so, like, Bartleby, like the rat creature that's best friends with Smiley? Yeah, so apparently, like, this one story that he did for, like, Hero Illustrated, this old magazine in, like, the 90s, that was Phone Bone going to deliver quiche to the rat creatures. Mm-hmm. He, like, in theory, that should have been at a point when Bartleby was with them, and Bartleby at no point, like, appears in there, and it was because he hadn't actually created Bartleby. And he was just like, he decided that he told himself that he was just like, Bartleby was somewhere off panel just existing, and it's just didn't happen to be there. But that was one of those things where you don't really realize how things will expand or contract as you're getting to those points, because sometimes things change as you move along. Have you found that any characters or story beats have expanded or contracted around those like kind of fixed points that you knew were going to be there? Like Gumbo, perhaps.
Yeah, I was gonna say Gumbo. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's I mean, maybe I just have a soft spot for weird animals after Chew.
Sure.
But like, issue 3 was it's still one of my like favorite issues, but I don't like. It's this weird.
Is that the camping one or the fishing one?
No. Issue 3 was when the first time you see Gumbo, where Gumbo is basically hanging out and stalking Riley the entire issue. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if people knew what to make of it at the time, because, issue 1 was fairly dark. Issue 2 had some dark points, and then issue 3 was like really light. Mm-hmm. And I think people didn't know what to make of it, but that's like, I just really wanted to have that kind of Spielbergian kind of light thing going on, and I just love that character. So like that character, the Gumbo character, but also the Mikhail character, who's the Russian spy. Yeah, essentially. Those two were they were never one-offs, but I really liked the stories. Like, the more I've gotten into it, the more I've really connected, especially with the Mikhail story. Because again, his whole arc was he's the Russian spy who's just there he's a child soldier, basically, who's basically just there to steal the seed for his Russian employees and employers. He ends up getting stranded, and Jedediah gives him a transplant, which puts him in an odd position, because if he goes back to his employers will kill him and take the transplant. So he decides to stay and hide out in Freetown, and he ends up becoming good friends with Ezekiel's son, Riley. So like, there's something about that story that really sticks with me, because I realized at some point that Mikhail was representative of, I think, the story as a whole. I mean, he's a character that, like, we hinted at the fact that, he's lost his parents. There's some kind of war going on somewhere, and he was caught up in it. So he's got all this trauma in his life that he never really asked for, but was kind of deposited in his life. And now, the second you meet him, he has even more trauma dropped into his life by Jedediah, who gives him this transplant he doesn't even really want.
And it's really horrible. I mean, honestly, like,
really horrible.
It seems like like, his process, I don't think is typical.
No, not at all. It's horrible. But Jedediah's reason that, well, it's no, what medicine is pleasant.
Right.
It's going to heal you, but it's going to be really unpleasant. But anyway, but basically, Mikhail is this really damaged person, and the only person who really believes in him is this kid Riley, he's a goofball. He's a complete goofball, and he loves him. He loves Mikhail. He's his best friend.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that redemption story, for whatever, I mean, I just really connect with it, and I think it is very representative of kind of the heart of Farmhand, which is all about redemption and reconciliation. And yeah, I think that story in particular is probably the one that expanded the most as I made it.
I also think it's interesting too, because such an important theme in the story. Well, not even theme. It's just like, it's everything. Family is such an important part. In Mikhail's, like, found family. Like, it's a different version of family. It's like same with Tree. Tree's not actual family, but he's found family. And it's really interesting because I do think it's funny that both of your characters that have kind of expanded maybe the most are characters that are, like, Riley adjacent.
Yeah. Well, I think he is the heart of the book, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the innocent. Like, he might be the only innocent in the entire book. Everyone else has, like, their own brokenness and their own baggage. And poor Riley is just like this goofball, like, who's just going around, he doesn't completely understand what's happening around him. But, I mean, he's just a kid. Maybe he's not supposed to.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm completely spacing. What is his daughter's name? Zeke's daughter's name?
Oh, Abigail.
So it is interesting. Like, I feel like it's not like a huge part, but like in the first issue, there's that moment where they're meeting Jedediah again for like the first time in forever. And he says, Abigail, I'm sure you don't remember me. And she's like, I remember you, Grandpa. And she has this memory of, like, riding on his shoulders. And it's interesting because it's like she honestly, like, in her own way, is kind of, like, affected by her past and affected by her memories. And like you're saying, it's like Riley is, like, in a weird way. I don't mean this in, like, a dramatic way, but he's, like, the only one that's, like, purely unaffected by everything. And so it's like he can look at, like, somebody like Mikhail and he can be like, you're good because you're my friend and not because, and I don't care about what you did in the past. And Gumbo, you may be like a weird, crazy offshoot of everything that's happened, but you're also a very good boy and I don't give a crap. And
right.
That purity is, like, it's kind of an essential counterbalance to everything else that's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you touched on something really major to the story. I mean, the Abigail character, I mean, like you said, she's not pure because she remembers the past, and there's a part of her that is very much shaped by her past and the trauma of being torn away from family, being torn away from Jedediah when they were basically estranged for most of her life.
Right.
We start to see little seeds of, like, I would say, bitterness she has. I think that is a big aspect of the future of the story. She has some issues. All the characters have issues to work through, essentially, except Riley, but just because Riley, he was born, he like you said, he didn't experience the past. He didn't know what life was in Freetown before this. He's completely a blank slate.
So in the back of issue 15, you mentioned how you hope people will, like, go back and revisit, like, the whole series because, like, just you can see kind of how everything has been kind of everything with issue 15 has been building to it, even if you didn't realize it. I mean, like, I don't mean that in even a typical plotting way. I mean, like to a certain degree, like, you were almost calling your shot in the very first scene of the entire comic, where you have that dream sequence that Zeke is having. And Have you heard from anybody? Like, is that a thing that people are doing? Because I do think that sometimes we get so locked in like the monthly comic cycle that you forget to like recall what happened before, and it can make a massive difference.
Yeah, no, people, I kind of put out in social media also that, hey, issue 15 comes out tomorrow, but when you get it, go back and, sure, read it, but then go back and read the whole thing because it is a whole, it is a novel.
Yeah.
And yeah, people have been doing it and people have been really, really enjoying it. I've been getting in letters, messages and all that stuff. And yeah, that's one of the things that actually really frustrates me about American comics. I was in Paris last year for a festival, and I was just kind of hanging around with all these French artists, and basically, they don't have like the monthly floppy stuff. Mm-hmm. They basically just have like, the first trade, a nice 5-issue hardcover to start with. They go straight to trades, and I thought, I was describing to them, how we do things here. And I was like, yeah, basically how we do things here is, we'll release the first issue, 30 pages, 20 to 30 pages. And, we'll pray to God that, people are interested enough to come back for issue 2. And they were just like horrified. They were like, you can't do anything in like 20 to 30 pages. Like, it doesn't get good. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's what's so frustrating. I mean, I knew exactly where I was going from the very beginning in terms of, the arc by arc, story. But the hard part was not knowing if people would stick with me because they would get impatient. So I've actually thought of like just going straight to trades with Farmhand,
right?
Which I don't think I would. I don't think it's going to end up happening just because, I've been doing the singles up to this point, but it is tempting because I don't know. There's this lack of attention. And I don't think it's necessarily people's fault. I think it's just the culture we live in.
Yeah.
Where there's more content than there ever has been, not just in comics, but everywhere else. And we're all vying for the same people's attention. Yeah, it's frustrating.
Well, it's interesting, though, because it's like, I think to a certain degree, so like my problem is, so I buy it in single issues. And like if I wanted to go back and reread the whole series, I have to like get into my long boxes, and I could show you a picture of my long boxes, Rob. It would not be an enjoyable experience to like, try to like dig out anything. And it's weird because like I would love to go back and reread it, but it's just kind of like, it would actually be easier for me to just order the 3 trade paperbacks and then, which would be great for you, of course. But I mean, like to do that, then trying to dig that stuff out. But I do think to a certain degree, it's like Chew, like your experience on Chew was a unique example of the extreme upside to doing it the way that we're doing it, because you did pretty well in single issues, and then you did pretty well in trades, and then you had omnivore editions, and then you had smorgasbord editions, et cetera, et cetera. And then, I mean, I was going to bring up the fact that you were in France. I do love the continuing success and adventures of Rob Guillory in France, because I know Tony Chu Detective Cannibal was a success over there. Yeah. But it's interesting because it's like Chu definitely, like I've talked to Eric Stevenson about this, and he says that like Chu is the example he speaks to people about the potential of working with Image, because it's like if it strikes, like it doesn't have to be a Walking Dead size hit to be really, successful and, beneficial to creators. Like Chu is the ideal for him. And I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It's like, I can see both sides. Like from a reader standpoint, it kind of is problematic at times, but at the same time, like for you, it seems like if it works with single issues, it's going to be gigantic.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no perfect solution. I mean, either one is going to have its downsides. I know I've heard Eric kind of like speak about Chew as kind of like the example, which is always super flattering. I mean, I think Chew absolutely was like the perfect kind of prototype.
Yeah.
Especially because, we were nobody. I mean, John had been around the industry for a while, but I mean, Chew was my first comic. So, to have a couple guys come off the street and like have this successful comic is kind of mind blowing.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, like I love Chew, but it is such a bonkers idea. Like it's so outside the box for comics. I mean, for anything really, that like it's kind of like, I don't mean any offense to any of you guys or any of your ideas, but it's like these two guys doing that idea becoming a massive hit. I mean, it's just like anything is possible at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, like John and I have reflected on, what if we released Chew today? What if we didn't do it in 2009? What if it's 2020? And how different would it have been received? For whatever reason, we just kind of dropped in the right moment.
Yeah.
People were looking for a specific thing.
I honestly, like, that is one of the weird things. I obviously in 2020, when there's a pandemic, it's a completely different animal. But like, even if you release in 2019, 10 years later, I don't think it would have been anywhere near the size of hit it was.
Yeah. I mean, the landscape has completely changed. And it's like, on the one hand, I mean, there's some amazing stuff going on out there. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much stuff. I mean, I love comics. I just can't keep up with it because there's just so much of it,
Yeah. I have so many examples of books that I like kind of take on as my pet projects. Like, have you ever read Xander Cannon's Kaiju Max?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's my favorite comic. I just love it. And like, I tell literally anyone who will listen, like I've bought that for listeners before just because I'm like, read this comic. And it's just weird because it's kind of, it bums me out because just like some books still just don't connect, even if like podcasters are literally buying copies for listeners. And I don't know, it's really strange. But this ties into something I want to ask about. Everything's going on plan creatively. It seems like it's going to expectations and it's going really well. But how have things been performance wise? Like, have you found that you've connected with an audience with Farmhand?
I have. I mean, I think the audience it's very loyal.
Right.
I mean, it's comparable with our Chew sales. It's a little less than the Chew sales. Our Chew sales were never like Walking Dead sales. I mean, our Chew sales were always, for the single issues, like
solid.
In the area. Yeah, they were like 10,000, between 10 and like 15,000. Farmhand these days, 15 issues later, is in the area of 8,000, which is, I mean, pretty respectable, especially considering it's literally just me doing it.
Right.
So like it's doing well enough. Trade sales I'd like to see go up more, but a lot of it is I get a lot of feedback from people who have just never even heard of the book yet.
Yeah.
And I think and these people are already fans. Like these people follow me on social media and they still have missed it. And I think it's just, I mean, it happens. I mean, we there's so much stuff coming out so quickly. It's just easy to miss things sometimes.
I mean, it's a volume proposition. I mean, I was watching TV the other day and I found out that there is a Tom Hanks movie coming out next week on Apple TV Plus. And then my first response was, Apple TV Plus? And then my second response was, there's a Tom Hanks movie coming out? And apparently it's like a World War II movie. And it's just like, I don't know. I remember doing a survey of retailers, and the retailers, when I asked them, I was like, what's your biggest point of competition? And I was expecting like Comixology or piracy or Amazon or whatever. Number one response was Netflix.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I don't think people think in a very myopic way when it comes to comics, but every piece of entertainment is competition. Like Animal Crossing is competition for Farmhand, even though no one would ever think it.
Right. But I mean, it's one of those things where at the end of the day, the people that are supposed to find it will find it. And that's kind of what I've been experiencing is, Farmhand's been a slower burn than Chew ever was, because Chew had the benefit of a crazy, not just social media, but just like the sites got behind it. Like you had your CBR and your Newsarama really pushed it and it became a thing, with Farmhand. Not that there hasn't been that much media push for it really at all. It's still kind of this really weird cult book.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been doing pretty well for me.
Not to slander my own fellow peers and everything like that, but the weird thing too is like that's another element that I think people sleep on is like 2009 comic sites I think had a little more heat when it came to pushing books. Like they were a little bit more believable tastemakers, and I don't know if they're necessarily that anymore. And I guess I just don't know what does that. And also it's like everything is so decentralized because of just how many comics are coming out. It's like if you just looked at every site, you would think that literally every comic was a must-buy comic. And if every comic's a must-buy comic, no comic is a must-buy comic.
Absolutely. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of it, has been me directly like pushing it to my fans. I mean, a lot of it has been, I just built a new website. I'm doing a newsletter. I'm doing a lot of correspondence directly with my fan base, who are super dedicated. So I think that has been my focus nowadays.
Yeah.
I'm just focused on taking care of the people who have been taking care of me for so long at this point.
So, are you planning on doing? The one really nice thing about the way that Farmhand is structured is it's similarly to Chew. I could see like a lot of different ways you could slice that from a collection standpoint. Like you have your trades, and then like you could do like 10-issue like hardcovers, and then you could do like 15-issue like omnibuses. I mean, is that something you're planning on doing with the series, especially with the hiatus, or is that not necessarily in the plans?
That's something we're going to talk about down the road. I mean, at this point, I'm really just focused on finishing the series, period.
Yeah.
Whenever we get there, I'll assess with Image, how things are. But no, I mean, we've talked a little bit about it, but it's just not there yet,
Yeah, sure. Well, just a few more questions. I did want to ask, so the last 2 issues, you had Rico Renzi coloring you.
Yeah.
What happened with Rico stepping in? I thought that because you started with Taylor Wells coloring it. I guess I didn't even notice that Taylor wasn't coloring it anymore, and you were coloring yourself for a bit, weren't you?
I've colored a few covers for Farmhand, but yeah, no, Taylor's been with me forever. I mean, she was my color assistant on Chew for like 40 something issues, and yeah, she colored the first 12 issues of Farmhand, and at the end of the day, she really needed to just step away to take care of some life stuff, some
Sure.
real life stuff. Which obviously was it wasn't ideal, but she had to do what's best for her, and I totally like get that. But yeah, we had to end up kind of scrambling to find some help. So we had Rico step in for 2 issues, and Rico's a good friend. I mean, he's amazing. And I mean, it was a pretty cool experience. I mean, we'll definitely be working together again in the future. But yeah, that was a kind of a nice surprise for Farmhand in issues 14 and 15.
Is that something you're having to kind of sort out during the hiatus? Is who like the kind of long-term colorist is going to be?
Yeah, I'm actually thinking about coloring myself again.
Oh man.
Yeah, I know. That's insane.
I was just thinking about how not busy you were, so that's perfect.
Well, I mean, I think I've actually been kind of like changing how I do things in terms of the art. Like I actually just invested in a really nice iPad Pro, and I've been coloring on it since for the last couple of months, and it's really a lot more fun than it was coloring on my Wacom. So I think a lot of the strain of coloring myself was always being shackled to a desk for a week straight. With the iPad, I can go to a cafe, I can go wherever, and it's a lot more fun, and I find that I'm being a lot more productive with it. So I'm not sure, but at the very least, I know. I mean, that is part of the reason I'm taking the hiatus. Also, it's just to kind of find the rhythm, the new rhythm, whatever that looks like. Because again, for 8 years with Chew, it was one very specific rhythm where I was doing I was penciling and inking and essentially coloring a page a day. Now it's, I'm a good bit older now, and the kids are getting older, and life is a little slower than it was back then. So I don't think I have it in me to produce what I used to produce back then.
Right.
Especially like handling the business aspect of it. So yeah, I think I'll be producing at a slower pace. I'm thinking like with Farmhand so far, I've been doing about 8 issues a year ish. So for now, I'm looking at probably closer to like, I may be only doing like a trade a year. If I'm going to be doing, if the TV show, lines up, if that works out, plus with a few other projects I have kind of percolating at the same time, I'm probably looking at maybe a trade a year.
Sure.
And the workhorse in me, that I was on Chew, looks at that and is like, that's only a trade a year. You can do more than that. But, I probably could, but it probably wouldn't be healthy for me.
Right.
So I'm kind of just giving myself permission to get a new workflow that's healthy for me.
Well, and I think that there's two ways you can think about it. One, you could like be down on it because it's like not at the rate you were at, but at the same time, I think as long as you have predictability to your schedule, it's like I think the idea that comics can't be successful if they're not like relentlessly being released is not necessarily true. It's more that readers know when to expect new comics. Like if you say I'm gonna do a trade a year and that like these 5 months were gonna be when the single issues come out, like you have with your calendar in every issue, and then the 6th month will be when the trade drops. That kind of cadence, if there's a predictable cadence, I think that's more important than like I'm gonna be releasing 8 issues come hell or high water.
Right. I agree. I mean, that's been my experience with Farmhand doing the calendar is, you know, when people see you're consistent and you're dedicated to being consistent quality and consistent output, you know, people will come back. So yeah, that's pretty much my new approach. And I'm giving myself like the space to do it because, you know, I'm used to being, you know, kind of the monthly comic guy.
Right.
But the older I've gotten, you know, the more I look at the monthly schedule and I'm like, oh my God, like I can't, like, I don't want to do that anymore. You know, I want to take a little more time to really to craft this script or to craft this art. I don't want to just hack it out, you know?
Yeah, and if you burn yourself out, it's going to affect the comic. And if the comic's worse, then that's going to affect interest a lot more than whether or not it comes out 6 times a year or 8 times a year.
Exactly. So yeah, I'm looking at probably coming back with Farmhand. I would say early 2021 is what I'm looking at. I basically have the 4th arc mapped out for the most part. I'm going to start scripting. I've started kind of like shaping the scripts. So yeah, but I can't say if I'll be coloring it or not. I may come to my senses and change my mind.
Okay. Well, before we go, just a couple more questions. I did want to ask. We talked about this a little bit beforehand. Obviously, the pandemic has been omnipresent with everything, and it's like one of those things that everybody's kind of talking about to a certain degree. I am curious, like how the pandemic and how it's shifted comics, because even if you don't constantly pay attention to what's going on in comics, it's hard not to see comic shops being forced to close, Diamond closing for a time, you know, DC going renegade, et cetera, and like not feel like there's certain winds of change coming our way. Has that changed how you think about comics at all during the span?
Yeah. Well, again, like I was in a really weird place before the pandemic in terms of comics, just because I was just, you know, I was so burnt out before the pandemic happened. I was already considering this. You know, I'd been around the industry long enough to see people really get burnt out, and I think what's the best way to say this? Comics doesn't always love you back.
Oh yeah.
Which I've actually been seeing more and more people say lately. And I think I'm a guy that has been all comics all the time for the past like 12 years at this point. And I was already deciding before this even happened, you know, I don't know if this is completely sustainable. Not financially, but just like health wise.
You mean in terms of producing at the rate you were?
Exactly. Like, and yeah, I'm not completely sure how I feel about the comic industry in its current iteration. But clearly, like things have to change, and I think the pandemic really like brought that to the forefront. And I think we all knew it. I mean, whenever you go to conventions or whenever we have these conversations, we all know that, you know, things are kind of held together by duct tape.
Right.
But when the pandemic happened, you really saw like, wow, okay, there's some business practices here that are really like barely holding it together.
Yeah.
So it's been eye-opening the more I've gotten kind of outside of comics and the more I've started like, you know, working with book publishers or working with networks in Hollywood. Like there's a level of professionalism that I'm encountering outside of comics that makes the comic industry look a little backwards.
Sure.
And I think comics needs to step it up.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means exactly, but I know I know we've done it one way for so very long, and clearly something has to change. And I don't know if that means I don't exactly know what that means for the direct market. I mean, honestly, for me, I've been playing around with self-publishing. Um, I've been playing around with self-publishing. I almost self-published Farmhand, um, but I realized that, that really, with three small kids and a marriage, that would have been like disastrous. Um, but now, like it seems a lot more plausible the way things are with social media. I don't know if I think you could probably, as a creator, make a pretty healthy living, given the right circumstances, self-publishing nowadays.
Well, I'm doing a piece on Kickstarter right now, and well, not Kickstarter, but crowdfunding in general. And I do think it's really interesting how, like, you could see like the same mechanic for single issues. Like, let's say, well, you're a perfect example. Let's say it's like you decide to do Farmhand, but instead of doing it Farmhand, you decide to go like the panel syndicate type route where you self-release digitally and it's kind of buy what you or pay what you want. And then what you do when the first arc is done is you kickstart the collection, and then you do the whole thing. And then like you could keep that cycle going, and you could almost like DIY it, and probably, it's such the problem is it's completely uncertain as to whether or not that method would work when your names aren't Brian K. Vaughan and Marcos Martin. But at the same time, that's assuming that the regular version of the comic industry doesn't have similar levels of uncertainty in of itself. And I'm not sure if it's a lot less uncertain to go the other routes.
Yeah, no, I think anyone who's self-employed realizes, like, security is kind of an illusion.
Sure.
I have a brother-in-law who's an accountant, and he looks at what I do and he thinks it's the craziest thing ever. It's like, you don't have like a boss. You just like sit in your office all day and you make things and you hope that someone buys it.
Right.
But really, his job could go away like that. Like, there is no real security in either case. So, I'm already used to kind of taking chances. So like, I'm not, taking that kind of leap in self-publishing or whatever it doesn't really scare me like it used to.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like the broader comic market, I really couldn't tell you. I do know that I'm talking to a lot of comic creators who are asking the same question.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
It is interesting though, because it's like you look at this conversation, and the fascinating thing is really what we're talking about is the uncertainty is within the direct market. If you look at like you look at France, you look at the Bande Dessinée, or I'm totally butchered that pronunciation, but whatever. Mm-hmm. You look at the manga market in Japan, you look at like Webtoon coming out of Korea, but also over here, you look at, kids books over here, like, middle grade readers, young adult stuff, like that stuff is doing really, really well. Like, right. I don't think you can tell like Raina Telgemeier or Kazu Kibuishi or Jen Wang that there's like a downturn in performance in comics, because they're like making a mint. And it is interesting because I think, a lot of people have had a lot of problems with like the moves that certain entities have made this year. And it's because they're trying to like do something different. But I've pushed this message so much. It's just like, I feel like one of the biggest problems with comics in terms of like the Western market, or at least in like the direct market, is that it's just really fearful of change, and that like everyone should just keep doing everything the same way it's always been done, because that's the way we do it. And I don't know if now is the time to keep doing things the way we've always done it.
I agree. And as soon as the pandemic happened and Diamond shut down, you started seeing all of these kind of distribution groups start up on Facebook.
Oh boy.
And it was just, yeah, I'm not going to go all into this.
I was very briefly invited to one, very briefly.
But you saw all of these people come together and really decide, like, okay, we have to like fix this. Let's fix this. But again, the second someone would float an idea, you would have people dogpile on the person, say that would never work.
Right.
And it's like, even on my Facebook, which is, of my social medias, Facebook is probably the one I have the most fun on, because I have a lot of dialogue with people.
Sure.
But I'll ask the question, hey, so, changing the model of what a comic shop is. Let's look at a subscription model, which I've been fascinated by forever. I mean, it's been around forever, and I kind of played around with the idea of, what would it look like to have a subscription model where, you basically pre-order, okay, the next 5 issues of Saga, the next arc of Saga is coming out. Here are the dates. If you pay, a discount rate of, $20 or whatever, you're going to have all those issues, but you're paying for it now. And I floated this idea, and, it was very interesting. I got a lot of feedback from retailers, and some retailers are already doing that. And there are very few and far in between, but there are certain shops who are already testing things, sort of like a Netflix model for comics in shop. And you could see, like, they were like, the old guys, the old comic shop guys, like, the old fans weren't really for it at first, but like they got on board when they saw how efficient it was, but really it was just getting them to get past the fact that it was new. And a lot of times people just don't want that change. It's not that it's a bad idea. It's that they don't want to be made to feel uncomfortable at all.
Yeah.
And that's what's frustrating, especially if you want to make progress.
Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to have progress without like at least some semblance of uncomfortability.
Right. So I think the beauty of it is, you can have, all of these shops are kind of like an experiment onto themselves.
Right.
Being able to talk to certain retailers that are trying exciting new things and, using technology a lot of times, like where they'll, send text messages out to their readers and say like, hey, the new Farmhand is coming out tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And, having that level of connection is very interesting. And it's exciting to see certain shops step into it, even as other shops just continue to do things the old way. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. All right. One last question. I want to go back. We already talked about Chew a little bit. I did want to ask, because you just did Outer Darkness Chew. You did like a bit in it. It was mostly John Layman and Afu Chan. Mm-hmm. What was it like revisiting Chew? Was it like riding a bike where you immediately were kind of, I know what this is like. I can do this. This is, something that I've always had. Or was it a little bit more, I don't know, hard to jump back in, especially because you've been in like farmhand mode for 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, it was. I was a little worried because I had been in farmhand for so long, and I hadn't really jumped back into this level of Chew. I never stopped drawing Poyo or anything because I feel like I get a Poyo commission like every month. Mm-hmm. Like everyone's always like, can you draw Poyo for me? Yes, I would draw Poyo for you. Like I will probably be on my deathbed like drawing Poyo for people. But yeah, it was actually like riding a bike once I got into it.
Right.
I know these guys. It was actually very, very refreshing to stretch that like ridiculous thing, that's ridiculous muscle.
Yeah.
I mean, in farmhand, I just rarely ever really get to do that. And it wasn't until I got the scripts from John that I realized, I haven't done anything this crazy in a really long time. Like, I mean, if you've read it, I mean, there's the scene that I ended up drawing involved, Mounties, Canadian Mounties who are hopped up on spiked maple syrup.
Of course.
And it is complete lunacy. It was a lot of fun to draw. It is a little bittersweet, because I mean it's like your baby.
Yeah.
And Afu Chan killed it. I mean, he did an amazing job, but there's still a part of me that's like, why are you touching my baby?
No one can draw Applebee's disgusting armpit sweat like you can.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was a lot of fun. I mean, anytime I get to work with John, it's always a lot of fun. I mean, we worked together for so long. Getting back to that is, I'll always be open to going back to it just because it's kind of home for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Farmhand and Outer Darkness Chew and the comics industry and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
No, thanks for having me, man.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with cartoonist Rob Guillory. You can find him on Instagram and his website. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members-only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give this show a rating and review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductorTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Dan Lee, Cameron Schrader, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Philip Merritt, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Leona Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ryanwan, Vita Ayala, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Elcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Plato, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Ira James Udaskin, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Cole McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DeBenacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.